Before the cross arrived on Philippine shores, there was already an answer to the biggest question humans ever ask. Where did everything come from? Not a borrowed answer, not a translation of someone else's mythology. A fully developed, internally consistent cosmological system that explained the sky, the sea, the first human beings, and the moral architecture of the universe. It was told in chants called epics. It was memorized by priests and priestesses. It was alive. Then it was almost completely erased. Almost? The Tagalog creation story begins before time, not at the beginning of time, before it. There was no earth, no sky, no horizon separating the two. There was only the primordial sea, called the deep waters, and above it, an infinite and featureless sky. These two forces, water and wind, were not passive elements. They were conscious, they were in conflict. All right, the sea threw its waves upward, the sky pushed back with wind. Their collision was not a catastrophe, it was a negotiation. And from that negotiation, the first land appeared, forced up from the water by the sheer pressure of two ancient forces refusing to yield to each other. This is not metaphor dressed up as mythology. This is a coherent physical theory rendered in narrative form. Tectonic pressure, geological emergence, the birth of islands from oceanic conflict, the Tagalog cosmogony describes in poetic language something remarkably close to what geologists now say about island arc formation in the Pacific Ring of Fire, the archipelago explaining its own existence in its own terms. Into this primordial landscape came the first bird, a great bird circling between water and sky with nowhere to land. It stirred the sea. It provoked the waves, and the sea, in its agitation, threw up rocks and earth, creating land for the bird to rest upon. Creation as consequence, not divine decree, but dynamic interaction. Then came the first bamboo. It grew from that new earth, and when the great bird pecked at it in curiosity, the bamboo split open. From inside it emerged the first man, Malachus, and the first woman, Maganda. Strong and beautiful, not made from dust, not shaped from clay, not carved from wood. They emerged from something that was already alive. The first humans came from within nature, not placed on top of it. That distinction matters enormously. Most creation stories in the ancient world position humans as the final act, something separate from nature, something appointed to rule it. The Tagalog story positions humans as emerging from it. You were inside the bamboo before you had a name. Nature did not precede you as a resource. It preceded you as a parent. Now, here is where this story gets historically complicated. When scholars in the late 19th and early 20th centuries began seriously studying pre-colonial Philippine belief systems, they assumed what most colonial-era scholarship assumed, that these traditions were regional variations on Hindu-Buddhist influence from the Indianized kingdoms of Southeast Asia. They looked for Sanskrit roots. They mapped Filipino deities onto Indian archetypes. And some connections genuinely exist. Certain words, certain ritual structures do reflect centuries of contact with South and Southeast Asian trade networks. But the deeper you dig into the oldest recorded oral traditions, the Visayan epics, the Bicolano creation cycles, the Ilocano cosmologies, the stranger and more independent everything looks. The architectural logic of these belief systems does not behave like a derivative tradition. It behaves like a source. The Visayan cosmology, for example, describes a layered universe with multiple celestial realms and an underworld, a structure that parallels Hindu cosmological geography but diverges in its internal rules, its pantheon, and its understanding of moral causality. In Hindu cosmology, karma operates as a universal law of cosmic consequence across lifetimes. In Visayan cosmological thought, The relationship between human action and cosmic response is more immediate, more local, more relational, embedded in the specific landscape, the specific community, the specific spirit world attached to a particular mountain or river. That is not a simplified version of Hindu philosophy. That is a different philosophy entirely. Stop for a second. If these traditions were simply imported, simplified versions of mainland Asian religion, you'd expect them to be less internally complex when examined closely. You'd expect the gaps, the borrowed seams, the places where the logic doesn't quite hold because it was translated from somewhere else. Borrowed mythologies leave fingerprints. The Philippine traditions don't have those fingerprints. They have their own fingerprints. Linguist and anthropologist Francisco Demetrio, who spent decades documenting Philippine folk literature and mythology in the 20th century, identified recurring cosmological structures across geographically separated Philippine ethnic groups that could not be explained by contact with each other or with mainland Asian civilizations. These were not borrowed patterns, these were indigenous convergences. Separate communities arriving at similar cosmological frameworks through their own independent reasoning about the world. That is a sign of philosophical maturity, not cultural borrowing. Think about it. The deity systems of pre-colonial Philippines add another layer of complexity. The Tagalog supreme deity Bathala was not a creator in the interventionist sense. Bathala did not micromanage human affairs or demand worship in exchange for protection. Bathala was more like a principle, a foundational presence, an original force from which existence flowed. Let's say beneath Bathala existed an entire working hierarchy of Anaito, or ancestral spirits, and a complex network of Dewata, nature deities attached to specific places and phenomena. This is not animism in the dismissive sense that colonial writers used the word. This is a sophisticated relational theology. The universe is understood as a community of conscious forces, each with its own domain, each requiring relationship rather than domination. You don't conquer the forest, you negotiate with it. Incidentally, the Babaylan made that negotiation possible. Important, the Babaylan were the spiritual practitioners of pre-colonial Philippine society, primarily women, though some were male or gender-variant individuals called asog or bayog. They were healers, mediators, historians, and ritual specialists. They held the oral archives. They memorized the chants that kept the cosmological knowledge alive across generations without writing. Everything you now know about pre-colonial Filipino belief came down through them, or survived because of them. When Spanish colonization accelerated across the archipelago after 1565, the suppression of the Babaylan was not incidental to the conversion effort. It was central to it. The Spanish colonial project understood with uncomfortable clarity that you cannot replace a cosmology while its practitioners are still functioning. You have to remove the practitioners first. Now pay attention. The Babaylan were labeled brujas, witches. Their rituals were criminalized. Their status was systematically dismantled. Some were executed. Others were absorbed into the margins of colonial religious life, their practices surviving in syncretic form, hidden inside Catholic festivals and devotional customs that looked orthodox from the outside but carried older meanings underneath. If you want to understand just how deep that survival goes, and how much of the original cosmological structure was preserved in disguised form through folk Catholicism, through the Pagan tradition, through provincial healing practices that the Church tolerated because it couldn't fully eradicate them, stay with this channel, because that story deserves its own full examination. Incidentally, the remarkable thing is not that the cosmology survived in fragments. The remarkable thing is how sophisticated those fragments reveal the original system to have been. Consider the concept of kaluluwa, the soul. pre-colonial Filipino thought did not conceive of the soul as a singular, bounded entity belonging exclusively to one person. The kaluluwa was understood as relational, as something that could be lost, displaced, stolen, or restored through human and spiritual intervention. Soul loss was a medical diagnosis. Soul restoration was a medical treatment. The Babaylan was the doctor. This conception of the self, as porous, relational, embedded in a web of spiritual relationships rather than isolated in a body, is philosophically distinct from both Hindu Atman, Buddhist Anatta, and Christian soul doctrine. It is not a midpoint between them. It is its own position, and it may be old, very old. Archaeological work across the archipelago, particularly discoveries at sites like Cagayan Valley, which have produced some of the oldest human habitation evidence in island Southeast Asia, suggests that the Philippines has been continuously inhabited for a period of time that makes the concept of cultural borrowing from later civilizations at least partially absurd. These were not empty islands waiting for civilization to arrive from the mainland. These were places where human communities had been working out their relationship to existence for an extraordinarily long time. The Laguna copperplate inscription, dated to 900 CE, shows a Philippine society already integrated into a sophisticated regional trade and diplomatic network, literate, legally organized, connected to the Malay, Javanese, and Sanskrit-speaking worlds, but not absorbed by them. It is written evidence of a society confident in its own identity. To be honest, that confidence had roots, deep roots. So why does this matter now? When a creation story is replaced, something specific happens to the people who carried it. The replacement doesn't just change their theology, it changes their relationship to their own landscape. Their rivers, their mountains, their forests stop being inhabited by presences they have names for and start being background scenery in someone else's spiritual drama. The Tagalog story didn't say the first humans were given dominion over the earth. It said they were born inside it. That is not a small difference. It is the difference between a worldview that produces environmental stewardship and one that enables extraction. It is the difference between a culture that sees the spirit world as a negotiating partner and one that sees it as a threat to be exorcised. By the way, when contemporary Filipinos encounter these stories, the bird between sky and sea, the bamboo cracking open to release the first man and woman, many of them report something that is hard to articulate but instantly recognizable. Not nostalgia, something closer to recognition, as if a memory they didn't know they had suddenly surfaced. That recognition is not romantic nationalism. It's not a claim that everything before colonization was perfect or harmonious. Pre-colonial Philippine societies had their own hierarchies, their own conflicts, their own internal contradictions. The cosmology did not make everyone wise or just, precisely everyone, but it was theirs. It was constructed from their specific experience of the world, the typhoons, the volcanoes, the bamboo groves, the tidal rhythms of a people surrounded by ocean on every side. It fit. It had earned its place through thousands of years of people asking hard questions and passing the answers forward. Spain replaced it with a cross in less than a century, and yet here we are, centuries later, still able to reconstruct the shape of what was there before, still able to read the chants, however fragmentary, still able to hear Malakas and Maganda stepping out of the bamboo into the new-made world. Cosmologies that die completely leave no traces. This one left traces everywhere, in language, in ritual, in the way certain communities still relate to specific mountains and rivers and ancestors they can name. The cross changed everything, but it didn't change everything completely. And maybe that's the most interesting thing about human memory. It compresses, it hides, it migrates into new forms, but it rarely disappears entirely. Important, the people who first looked up at the Philippine sky and asked where everything came from. Their answer is still here, waiting like the first bird for somewhere to land.